Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening or watching this podcast episode. Would love for you to share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast, subscribe to it so that you don't miss any future episodes, and we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today, we are joined by Spencer Combs, an author, coach, and the mind behind the Momentum and Mastery and the Unshakable Framework, which is revolutionizing how business leaders find unshakable profit, productivity, and purpose even in the face of chaos. Spencer's work combines real-world experience with transformative insights, helping leaders turn uncertainty into unstoppable progress. He's here to dive into the tools and the mindsets that redefine resilience and create lasting success. This is a favorite topic of mine. So let's get ready to learn and what it really takes for champions to lead with clarity and purpose. Spencer, welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective show.
Maybe I should probably work on getting a shorter introduction. That's huge, and it makes me feel really good, but thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about being here.
It's great to have you here. So Spencer, before we kick into some questions, I'd love for you to share your journey in this life, where you've come from, what challenges you've been through yourself, how you've overcome them, and what led you to start this Momentum, Mastery, and Unshakable Framework.
So, thank you. I think just about like anybody, any other person that's getting into the coaching space or doing coaching at all, it usually has been birthed out of some sort of adversity in their own personal life. And mine hasn't been any different, right? Of course, there was a time when you would say, oh, I had a difficult childhood, but guess what? We all have. So just join the club, So you really can't use that as a launching point. But I did have a very confusing childhood. And then as I got older, it was a lot of inconsistencies, things happening in my life. And then, I learned the power of conditioning, meeting the right people, talking to the right people, and getting where I wanted to go. But I've dealt with everything from physical challenges like epilepsy, and I have an anemia. There's other challenges I have physically. And then, of course, I've been through a divorce. I've been through all kinds of challenges with family members of that nature, with mental health disorders and things of that. So there's all this wild amount of history for me. And it brought me to eventually believe that, and I almost always start off these conversations by pointing out that I believe that professional development, right? Your ability to negotiate, your ability to make more money, the ability to have the budget you want for your company, whatever it is you're looking to really do from a professional development standpoint, is always going to come on the backside of personal development, because businesses don't actually grow. People do, right? And so I have now spent the greater part of now 2 decades, I'm starting into my third, and doing nothing but developing programs, workshops, writing books at this point, right? Momentum and Mastery and the whole Unshakable Framework to help individuals guide their businesses and their teams and their organizations to a much higher level of success. That's the simple version of the whole thing, I guess.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So your Unshakable Framework has inspired so many leaders. Can you share the personal experience that shaped your journey in creating this framework?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind, I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, Anthony. If you train in front of a group of people, and you've got 2 kinds of people in the room. You've got one person that seems to have all the resources, has everything ready to go. They've got a stellar resume or whatever. And for whatever reason, they take the information you give them and they don't do anything. They just fall flat on their face. And then you got a whole other group that has absolutely no history of success in this particular field. They don't have minimal resources. They're basically a scrapper. They come in, they take your information, and then they just explode. Right? And I got real curious about that kind of thing. And so I started digging in to figure out that, and this is early on, we're talking probably early 2000s, right around 2000. I was doing more and more training, 2001, 2002. And I began to realize that there are three critical factors to top performers. And this is kind of the infrastructure of the Unshakable Framework. And that's three pieces. It's the mechanics. You got to know how to do whatever it is you're going to be doing. There's the mindset, which is a big part of what this show is, and the people that are going to be listening to this. You got to have mindset, of course. And then the third piece is movement. Like, you have to take action.
Yeah.
So I realized that if there's an issue with one of those three things, we have an incongruency, which causes someone not to get to where they really say they want to be. There's something holding them back. So mechanics, mindset, and movement. Sometimes I'll say it in a different order, but those are the three. And we began to develop those over the years. I can tell you a fun little story. You didn't ask, Anthony.
Go for it. Tell us a story. This is all about stories.
Yeah, well, I remember very specifically working on the concept of congruence, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a very common word, but a lot of people love to talk about being in alignment, right? But I've always used the word congruence because congruence speaks to the necessity to carry weight. It can hold under the load, right? The stress of life, things that are going on in life. And when there's congruence, you can carry the weight. Where alignment could just be two things in alignment with each other, but it doesn't necessarily carry weight, right? And I'm not a big math person, and I'm not a big science, whatever, but it makes sense to me, at least, right?
It makes sense, yeah.
So I was working on this congruency thing, and I remember one day I had this epiphany because I was thinking, mindset and mechanics, those two have to be in congruence. They have to be congruent with each other for someone to actually have a high level of results. And I pulled out this big flip chart. I set it on the floor with my wife. I said, hold on a second. Can you have a negative mindset? It's like, absolutely, you can have a negative mindset. And so I drew the top, the vertical line, top being champions, and at the bottom is victims, right? And so this is a mindset axis. And then now mechanics. Can you have positive mechanics and negative mechanics? Yes. Zero, or the far left, would be essentially absolutely no results. It would be all rhetoric, right? Talking a good game. So if you got somebody from the standpoint of mechanics, there's some people that just know how to talk about it, but haven't got any results. And then you got the other end, the positive end of mechanics, are getting results at whatever level. And so we put these in a crosshair, and then I started digging into this thing, and it was super exciting for me because then I started realizing you could have an unqualified champion, right? So that's the top left-hand corner. And all this is actually in this book too, because it's the mastery portion. But if, unqualified champion, I'll tell you who these people are, Anthony. Unqualified champions.
Yeah.
They're all rhetoric, and they got the champion's mindset, right? These are people that are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Totally.
These are the people. And if you're feeling this way, by the way, you don't feel attacked, right? Somebody's listening to this. You don't feel attacked. Just understand the challenge is you're always leading with this mindset thing. It's like, I can will my way to my future. I can will my way there. Guess what? We're going to need to incorporate some mechanics into your business or your life or your career.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the action's a third factor altogether, but you got to know how to do what it is you need to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was fun to get all that set up. And then we ended up doing these qualified champion masterminds, and it's been very powerful for a lot of different people.
Wow. What were some of the pivotal moments in your life that fueled dedication for resilience?
Resilience. Well, probably one of the bigger ones would have been when I had a seizure while driving and hit a telephone pole at an estimated 50 miles an hour. And so I broke my arm and my face got busted up pretty good. And but I also have, of course, the moment of divorce and those types of things that I was staring life in the face. And I remember very clearly making the decision one day in 2004. I was standing on a riverbank, and I looked across and I said, you know what? This isn't it anymore. I'm changing. right? My life is not, and everybody has to get to a threshold moment like that where they just say, that's it, no more, no more. And so that was a big moment in my life. But I'd love to tell you that my life got better, Anthony, but it didn't actually at that point. It got a whole lot worse before it got better.
Absolutely. It does get worse before it gets better. And sometimes sometimes you've got to go through those low points to be able to bounce out of that and go forward. Yeah.
Certainly. Mm-hmm.
So how did overcoming those personal challenges like epilepsy impact your approach in coaching leaders?
I don't take anyone's personal situation, I don't make them any more grand than they have to be. So if I'm coaching someone a bit, I've got two right now actually that are going through a divorce. One is coming out of one, and I got another one that's literally getting ready to get into one. And that's not, I'd be lying if I told you those are the only two that I've ever dealt with in my coaching practice. But for whatever reason, I have people that come into my life that they're transitioning through a difficult period. Divorce is one of those, right? One of those types of things. And how do they maintain their business? How do they keep growing? But I never make it worse than it is, and I don't make it better than it is. It is what it is. And so we're going to now need to do what we need to do to get through this with the best possible outcome in the process, right? So while I got the one that's coming out of the divorce, the year was a difficult year for this particular person, but they're going to finish with their own production at the same level that they had last year. So that's pretty good considering. And yet the other one is getting ready to get into it. So now we're doing a lot of strategy discussions on what would that look like on the other side. And in some cases, it's just a matter of one day at a time, one step at a time, going through the process. So I have dealt with some really difficult situations in my life, and there's not a magic bullet. Sometimes the only way to it is through it.
Through it. What is in the way is the way, right?
Yeah, the obstacle is the way. It's a good book.
Yeah. So what were the specific insights and realizations that drove you to design that Unshakable framework?
So the frameworks, actually, the Unshakable framework is both momentum and mastery, which technically is two separate frameworks. So momentum is the drift to drive framework. What I realized, right? So getting people to take action, getting people to dig deep and get into the roots of the situation is all about the drift to drive framework. It's all about momentum. When I started talking to people and I do the initial evaluation with them and their business, I found out that there's a lot of people, they either lean on one or the other, meaning they're either super momentum minded or naturally momentum minded, or they're super mastery minded. And it just became kind of a natural observation. So, somebody listening to this right now might be thinking to themselves, well, I take a lot of action. I know what I'm doing. I'll go create chaos. And you're probably fairly successful. A lot of these people that are momentum minded typically do rather well. But the problem they have is that it's not sustainable because it's obtainable, but not sustainable. And so they have this high level of drive and they can pull a lot of people along with them. But at some point, it's not going to scale at any level. So that we have to work on the mastery side of this discussion. I think the general population doesn't roll that way. I think that's the heavy entrepreneurial type. I think that most of society leans heavy on mastery, right? They want to get it right. They want to understand the mindset and the mechanics, and they want to kind of get all that straight, and they want to do all that first before they take massive action. Well, those people, the mastery-minded people, I have to get them into momentum. I have to get them into that drift to drive discussion. So if I can do that at that point, then it's just a matter of, this is how we accelerate them, because it's really just a huge diagnostic tool, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you understand which side.
So does it require a balance or a harmony between the two?
I think most of the time when I draw it, now it's not this way in the book, but most of the time I draw it as in a big infinity loop, because, your life is about progress. It's not always about achievement. And so if you're at one level of drift,
Mm,
And drift is not necessarily I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. It's just kind of, this is my reality. This is my
mm,
current drift.
mm,
And once you've kind of mastered it and you got it in a certain way, you're going to have this calling that you should be taking it to the next level. So you got to go through the
mm,
momentum cycle to drive it and get it up higher, at which point then that's going to feed into your mastery side, which is going
mm.
to start. And mastery starts, there's 5 building blocks of that. The first one is purpose, right?
Yeah.
So what's the commitment and what's the outcome, right? So we're committed to an outcome that creates the purpose. When you have that, then we can start building on all those other blocks. And then once you get to the pinnacle of that, though, on the mastery side, it's about progress. It's understanding the flexibility of the feedback. And so you begin to constantly get better at whatever it is you're doing. But
Mm,
again, you're going to plateau at some point. We got to go back to the momentum. So I'd say it's a counterbalance more than it is a balance.
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. So you speak a lot about turning uncertainty into unstoppable progress. How can leaders start to build this mindset of resilience and adaptability?
I think that resilience and adaptability are fruit, not necessarily, it's what we want. People come to me, they're
Mm,
like, I want to have more progress, right?
mm,
But I think the root of the whole conversation comes down to a commitment to an outcome.
mm,
Few leaders are super committed to a specific outcome. I think there's plenty that are interested in an outcome, but few are committed.
mm,
The difference is the level or the emotion of expectation versus hope,
mm,
right? So if I have an expectation of a high level of results, then it doesn't matter what the market is doing. It doesn't matter what's happening on the outside, because one of the principles I share all the time is that victims are defined by the circumstance. Champions define the circumstance.
mm.
One's an affect, the other one's the effect,
Yeah.
right? And so if I'm going to have resilience and I'm going to have to be able to keep moving forward regardless of the circumstance, that's going to be a discussion of what am I committed to? What's the outcome
Mm,
I'm committed to?
mm,
Because from there, then we go into the second block, which is priorities. We are focused on a plan, or
mm,
we're focused on standards at that point. And so once you can get that going, you're not going to have a diffused focus. So anything that comes at me, I know what the standards are. I'm just going to keep leaning in on those things. And then the
mm,
third block is power, which has to do with accountability for resources. What do I have? Right? You
mm,
could lose a lot of things. Like I have an insurance agency owner, 30% of his business went away when his brother pulled out.
mm,
And 30% is a lot when
mm,
you're at a top line of $1 million in revenue,
mm,
right? So 300,000, boom, gone, right? So what resources do we have?
mm,
And we focus on that, and then we perform at a high level through a belief in our systems, and then we get into progress right? So I'm giving you the 5 building blocks of the whole thing, but to answer the question, got to get to the root. I got to
yeah.
know why bother.
Yeah. So you can be outcome focused, but like with people who get overwhelmed with the outcome, like, and they go, well, it's a massive goal that I've got to achieve, and how do I do this? And what advice would you give them? Like, is it like chunking it down, or what advice would you give
Yeah.
them?
So we're going to commit to an outcome, but we're
Mm,
going to focus on the plan.
mm,
And the plan is typically going to be a few standards that we're going to set for ourselves, which could be broken down into even daily activity, right?
mm, mm,
So so if we're going to have this kind of, let's say it's an income goal for the year or a volume sales goal for the year, then I'm going to have to break that down. And I don't know if we're going to get into this conversation, but we have what we call a wrap sheet and a wrap session, right? So wrap, WRAP, stands for weekly results and planning.
mm,
So when you get super focused on an outcome, then we break it down into standards. Now every week and every month, I'm reviewing what's my progress. Because here's a principle everybody needs to understand. The higher the performer, the more often they measure their progress.
mm.
right? So if you're checking in on your numbers and what you're doing once a month, you're about as average as it gets. If you're doing it every week, then you're probably better than most. But if you're doing it daily and getting down into the hourly numbers, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can adjust quickly. You can
Yeah.
tell when you're off track.
Yeah. Yeah. I do that with the podcast, and I look at the plays and like which topic is trending in my podcast. It gives me feedback and I do that daily. Feedback as to what are the people really wanting to listen to, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your case, you'd have to have some sort of an outcome for the podcast. Like for the year, I want to be X number of downloads per, total, or number of subscribers, or that kind of thing. Right. So when you clarify that, then you need to figure out kind of what are the standards, or what's the plan to make that happen. X number of podcasts, X number of, right. And so then we break that down. What needs to happen this week to make progress towards that outcome?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then if I adjust every week, we're going to be a lot further along.
Yeah. I had a goal to do, to get to 2,000 to 3,000 episodes in 10 years time. And so that means that I've got to publish at least 2 to 3 episodes a week. Yeah. And when I first started, I was doing 1 episode a week, and now I'm doing 2 to 3 episodes a week consistently.
There you go.
Yeah.
By the way, it's always, this is the coach in me, but it's always going to be one or the other. It's not going to be 2 or 3. It's going to be 2, or it's going to be one or the other.
It's going to be 2 or 3.
Right. So if the minimum number is going to be 2, then it's 2,000. And if I get past that, that's great. But that's my commitment. Right.
Yeah.
I'm interested in going to 3, but my commitment is 2. So I'm going to find a way to make that happen.
When I was in a full-time work, I was doing probably I was doing 3 a week, but I was pushing it. But now I've left the full-time work, and I'm now focusing on the podcast and my business. I'm doing 3. Like yesterday, I recorded 4 episodes in one day. Today I'm doing 2.
Kudos to you, man. I don't think most people realize how much work goes into doing an episode. Honestly,
that's a lot. That's a lot.
I don't have my own podcast, but I do have a show that I do every Tuesday evening here, my time. But and I don't have to worry about guests and things. It's not that easy. I know it's a lot of back end work.
You're looking at about 3 to 4 hours per episode of work. Yeah.
It's a gig.
It sure is. So, what are some of the common barriers to prevent leaders from thriving in uncertain situations?
I think most of the barriers, I'll tell you what, the fastest way to say it is it's either one of 2 problems. It's either a math problem or a motive problem. I didn't say motivation. I just said motive. Right.
Yeah. Could you expand a bit on that?
Yeah. I don't think, first of all, let me say this. I don't think we need motivation. We need neurological leverage. So motivation is a feeling, where leverage, emotional leverage, neurological leverage is an emotional conversation. There's a difference between emotion and feeling, right? Feeling can be very fleeting and in the moment, where an emotion is a neurological or physiological response.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
So that might've got a little too technical, but helping people, what's the biggest obstacles for them typically is going to be either a math problem or a motive problem. Math problems are the easiest ones to solve. And many times the only reason why they don't want to deal with the math is because of an actual motive problem, right? I don't know that I can handle a business that big, right? Or I don't want to embarrass myself. And so it's a motive issue. So this speaks to the whole momentum conversation and the 4 factors from going from drift to drive. Right? You got to have a dream. You got to have a desire. You got to get disturbed, and you got to make decisions. Those are the 4 pieces to that. And when you get all 4 of those put together, it creates that motive. It creates movement. It creates that momentum that will move you through. So if there's an issue anywhere, it's usually a motive problem.
Yeah. So with that motive problem, that's going to be self-worth, self-esteem based, right?
Yeah, staying focused on understanding your hierarchy of values and what actually moves you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does
A
the
lot of people,
sorry?
I'm sorry, but a lot of people carry a lot of shame around what they
Yeah.
think is important to them,
Yeah. And
right?
also when you're living in the shame, your frequency, your energy is lower because you're in that survival mode. And it's
You're
when you
incongruent.
exactly. And so when you start getting more congruent and your vibration, your energy is higher, then you start to attract the things that you are really passionate about and purposeful about. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is this the Unshakable Framework address? Like the barriers to help leaders push through their doubt and fear. How does it do that?
I think there's a lot of power in clarity.
Mm,
And so what it's giving you is clarity. What do you want and why do you want it?
mm,
Who do you have to become and how do I make that happen? Those are the four questions and in that
yeah,
order,
yeah.
the syntax. I think a
Mm,
lot of people make the mistake of talking, and I don't want to make it sound terrible, but there's a lot of people that will, training you go to and you'll hear instructors get up and say things like, you got to know your big why.
mm.
You ever heard anybody do that before?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, you got to know your big why. I don't disagree with that, but I think the problem from a pragmatic standpoint is that when you talk about your big why too much or you press people for a big why, they usually come back with really big enigmatic things that are very hard to quantify, which doesn't allow your brain to get into gear. Because it'll be things like, well, my children are my why,
Mm,
right? Or my church or my belief system, right? Like my religion and things like that. And or eventually you keep pressing people, they'll say things like, I want to build wells in Africa. Well, who doesn't, right? You say things that make you feel better and when you talk to other people about it. But the truth is, um, it
it's the
doesn't
feeling. Yeah,
actually, yeah, it doesn't actually move you,
yeah,
right? And this is a Spencerism, but if it doesn't juice you, it will not move you,
yeah, yeah.
right? And so the best way to uncover what moves you is to ask yourself a big what. What do you want, right?
Mm,
And so we create what we call an anchor goal. We do that in the book.
mm,
Create an anchor goal 3 to 5 years out. What do you want?
mm.
Right? And just capture some ideas. But what do you want? What do you want to see happen? And it needs to be big enough that's far enough out there that it's a lot of things going to have to line up. And when you have this anchor goal, now you ask yourself, why do
Why?
you want that?
Mm,
Right? And so without any shame, because I can talk to one other person, I can line up 3 different people. One of them will say, I want I want an Aston Martin, because that's true. I do want an Aston Martin.
yeah, me too.
Right? Oh, do you? Well, there you go. All right. I want an Aston
James
Martin, right?
Bond, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Right. So I want an Aston Martin, but then I could go to the next person and they say, well, I want to donate 50,000 to my church. Right. And the other one says, I want to have $100,000 or I want to have, um, a year's worth of income in the bank. Those are 3 different things and for 3 different reasons. Right. But one's not necessarily greater than the other. You just need to understand what actually moves you.
Mm,
I had I did a onboarding call this morning with a new lady who has got into the program. She does residential real estate and she does and she's got a gym, like a health gym, and she's building another one. And when I asked her about her anchor goal, she said, well, I would like to have a house at the beach for me and my two daughters. I said, well, that's wonderful. But I could tell in her voice and her facial expressions, that's why we do it on Zoom, by the way, that it really didn't move her. Like I could tell she was interested in that, but it was not commitment conversation.
mm,
What she really wanted to do, and it took a few minutes, but we got to it, it was the gym. And not only it was having that gym, but having it in her name only, paying it
mhm.
off, right? She had a very specific thing that she needed to do. And it would take her 3 years, probably to 5 years to make it all happen. But that's what moved her. And you can feel her energy rise when she's talking about it. when you can tap in on an anchor goal like that, now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter. Like, we got issues. Join the club. We all have issues, right? Life doesn't go the way we want it to. But when you are super locked in on what you want and why you want it, the who I have to become becomes a little bit cleaner, and how to make that happen is way easier to figure out.
Mm, mm. And it's about being the person that you want to become. Be that person now and step into that future version of you right now and start. If you don't start, you don't finish. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what role does the purpose play in sustaining productivity and profitability, especially for business leaders?
Well, in the subtitle of the book, it says The Business Leader's Guide to Fast Track Unshakable Profit, Productivity, and Purpose.
Mm,
The reason that's in the subtitle is because that's what people come to me for.
mm,
Those are, again, results. So purpose and productivity and profitability, they all three interplay with each other. Usually when you increase one, the others will increase along with them.
mm,
So really at the end of the day, it's a focus. The conversation shouldn't be about those three things as much as it is about mindset, mechanics, and movement, and clarifying which one of those is causing the problem, so that you can then unlock any of this stuff, right? I want more profitability in my company. All right, well, let's talk about that. Why bother? Right? Let's talk about the movement. Or okay, so you're committed to it. You're making a big mess. Tell me about your systems. Right? Is this duplicatable? Do we have anybody that, like, are we documented what we've done around here?
mm-hmm.
Right? I got a big company right now that none of their producers actually have any contracts. And you would think that's pretty common sense, but for them, it's important, but I had never really stopped to have to do that. Well, now we are, because if we're going to scale at the level we're doing, because we're going to go from $25 million agency to 50, and we're probably going to do it in less than 2 years. That's a big jump. That's an insurance company. So it's a huge jump, but you're not going to be able to do that without having some systems in place. So if the profitability piece, it still comes back to mindset, mechanics, and movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that there's one particular pillar that most people find challenging to cultivate?
Mindset, mechanics, or movement? One of those three? I think in the business space, it depends on what size business we're talking. Here's what I mean by that. So if you got an independent entrepreneur that's really a hard driver, they're probably going to have an issue with either mindset or mechanics. Right. And many times it's the mindset piece, because they've got the mechanics, they know what they're doing, and so they're burning out. If they are in a company and they're a leader of some sort, let's say a management role, they're like, let's say, a sales manager, they could very well have a problem with the movement piece. A lot of people do, because they're not very clear on what they want and why they want it, other than survival. That's just my observations.
Yeah, cool. So how do you help leaders who draw strength from their struggles and setbacks?
Simply reframing their struggle. What does it mean? Meaning is one of the few things
Meaning
that
you're
we
giving
actually,
it, right?
yeah, giving it a better meaning.
Yeah.
Right. So
I heard something
what else could
recently
this
that
mean?
everything, yeah, I heard something recently that everything is neutral until you give it a meaning.
Nothing has any meaning except for the meaning that you choose to give it. Right.
Exactly.
So I'll give you a simple example. This should be funny for you from an American. My American grandmother, because I have an Italian grandmother, my American grandmother always thought that American football was kind of weird. She didn't understand, because to her, it was just a bunch of grown men running around a grassy field and slapping each other on the rear end. Right. But I'm going to tell you something, Anthony. If I go into an office somewhere and let's say, man, I closed that big deal and some guy walks up and slaps me on the rear end, that's going to be a very unusual situation. Right? But oddly enough, because if I put on some tight pants, run around a grassy field, suddenly that behavior is completely fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's the same behavior, it's the same action, but two different meanings. And that's primarily because of what the meaning we've decided to give it. Right.
Based on the environment. Yeah.
The environment, there's so many different reasons, but at the same time, you know, if I want to, if there's been something difficult happen to me, I'll put it this way. Another thing that I like to tell people is there's really no right or wrong. That kind of messes with people. There's no real right or wrong. There's relevant and irrelevant, or effective or ineffective, period. Right. So if I'm clear on what I want, why I want that, right, the whole discussion we've been having here, then every piece of stimulus that comes to me, whether it's a bad thing, right, I lost this account, or I had to fire somebody, or I'm going to have to, whatever the situation is, the market tanks, the issues, whatever, the activity that I go from here is going to be either, is it relevant or irrelevant to my committed outcome?
Yeah. Totally. So are there any certain mindset shifts or exercises that you can recommend for building resilience?
For building resilience, really, it's about building a really good root structure. Okay. So I would tell a lot of times, in the book, we have a couple of exercises. One of them we call the magic wand story, which you basically write out the perfect day out in the future, right? But then we also create an anchor goal. And then we talk about what's called the 100 reasons why. And it's designed to get you super stirred up. The difficult side, the dark side of life, right? The stuff that really moves you. You got to learn how to dig into that kind of stuff. So from an exercise perspective, the one thing that I like to do all the time is two things. One, read my 100 reasons why on a regular basis. And two, I do what's essentially, I call them 2-minute drills, right? I'm a coach, so it sounds good to, do like a 2-minute drill. What that is 60 seconds of going into the past and conditioning my brain in gratitude for the things that I have based off of my particular values. Okay. So with that, I then go out into the future and I condition myself working my way out from the future back to the present, doing the exact same thing, visualizing and having a conversation of gratitude as if it's already happened, specifically focus on the things that I want to see happen. So this keeps the dream and the desire cycle, the stuff that it's all in the book. But if I'm driving all of that and I'm getting disturbed enough, the decisions will happen naturally on a day-to-day basis of what needs to take place. So those are conditioning exercises, essentially, to keep your movement meter, if you will, your energy levels high on what drives you.
Yeah. I saw a video last week with Paul McKenna, and he was doing exactly that, going out to the future and then stepping back every 3 months.
I have never seen Paul McKenna do that or anything, but it's super powerful if you do it that way, because your brain gets better at it over time, and you are conditioning your mind to look for that kind of opportunity when they show up. A particular activating system. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes, I am. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. That's all you're doing, is you're imprinting your mind with what's important. And so suddenly things that are not getting you closer, the irrelevant things, your brain is blocking out, and then the things that are relevant to that goal, it'll bring to your awareness way more often.
Yeah, because your RTS is a filter, and it filters out what it doesn't recognize. So the more you reprogram it to recognize the things that you do want in your life, then it will let it in. Yeah,
it's a powerful filter because it also blocks out things too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the daily practices that you recommend? I mean, you've shared those ones. Is there anything that people can do daily?
Well, the 2-minute drill you can do daily, but I also, sometimes when people are struggling with getting things done per se, We
Mm.
take the rap sheet, I mentioned that to you earlier, and we let that cascade into our calendar. And then if I'm still having a challenge with someone getting things done from a day to day because their focus is everywhere, we'll have them do a journal, like get a notebook, and on one side is what I'm going to do today. So that's a morning thing, right? So just
Mm.
you can have these are the outcomes that I'd like to see happen today. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, without necessarily focusing on what I was intending to do, but what did I do today? What are the outcomes, right? And the goal over time is to get those two to match each other. Initially, it usually is not for someone who has a hard time with focus. But what happens is, number one, just lining out what you want to do for the day will usually get you a lot further. But then having the self accountability of writing out what I did do today will begin to expose some things that I could cut that out. I don't have to do that. And why did I bite off so much? I don't need to chew that much, right? Let me focus on just this right now. And so it causes people to make better choices about their day-to-day activity.
Mm. Also, it would also highlight things that you may be putting off
Yeah. You keep
because of
writing it down,
fears.
but never do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because of fears and procrastination and
Do
all
you
sorts
know
of
what
reasons.
the number one excuse people use
What's that?
for that? That it's not, procrastination is not the actual thing. They say that I'm busy.
Busy.
I'm too
busy.
busy.
Busy for the sake of being busy. Yeah. Yeah.
Busy. Yeah.
I'm
So what
busy.
happens is people use busyness to avoid business, meaning
Business.
they're super busy. They're super busy, avoiding the one thing that's probably going to help them not be so busy.
Yeah. So maybe there should be another term meaning I'm doing business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going about moving forward here, right? I'm
Yeah.
going to get my
Absolutely.
goals. I'm moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things this podcast is around adversity and tough times, and a lot of people are going through tough times at the moment. So how does the Unshakable Framework guide leaders or everyday people or champions to maintain that progress during these tough times?
I think a lot of things change for people when they get real clear on what they want. So that's probably the number one thing to talk
Clarity.
about, right?
Mm.
We've already done that a lot, but the rap sheet and getting into a rhythm, right? Anything that has energy has a rhythm,
Mm.
and it's a rhythm of stress and recovery, technically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Problem is that too many people lean on one or the other. Once again, it's another pattern. What I mean by that is people will stress themselves out all the time, and they stay in a constant state of stress. Life will eventually throw you in a state of recovery, whether it's in an
Mm.
illness, whether it's a lost relationship, something's gonna give, and it's gonna throw you into recovery.
Absolutely.
I think the majority of people do it the other way around. A lot of people just stay in constant recovery until suddenly life gives you stress because you don't pay your bills on time, you don't do the things you should be doing, you don't take care of your body, you don't do right, and so life is going to throw you into stress. That's just how it's
Mm.
going to go. The key is actually taking control of that rhythm, putting yourself into stress, then putting yourself into recovery. And the funny thing about our bodies and our minds too is that it actually can deal with way more stress than we want to agree with because we don't like the pain, but that's where all the growth is. So it doesn't have to be equal parts, right? I don't have to go to work for X number of hours. That means I also need X number of recovery. That's not necessarily the case, right?
Mm.
I had a Nike running coach today in my ears, I'm out on the road and, I'm doing, it's got me doing 90 seconds of one particular pace, 90 seconds of recovery, right? And then we started going into this faster and shorter ranges. It's all designed to create this increasing what that whole exercise was is to increase my speed,
Mm.
right? And I do not have the runner's frame, so it's quite grueling for me. But I also know
Mm.
what I understand what I'm doing. You have to go through it to
Mm.
get to it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
it's the rhythm. Understanding your weekly results and planning. If you get clear on your outcome, then we can break it down into standards and then we can chunk it down. And we have a very strong sense of my goals and that kind of thing. This is some of the stuff that I help people with, right? So anybody that wants to have a quick one-on-one call, you can just go to my site, schedule that.
Mm, mm. Would you say that would be one of the key takeaways of your framework?
Key takeaways. Hmm. The key takeaway I would like to tell people usually is you're not broken.
Mm,
You're probably just using ineffective strategies.
mm,
That's
yeah,
the key takeaway.
yeah,
Because if somebody understands that they are not broken, something's not wrong with them, they need to understand the unshakable framework. They just need to understand what all this is and go through the process. They'll come out unshakable, way
mm,
more congruent, and they'll
mm,
be able to get farther than they thought they could.
yeah, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share from the framework that would help listeners today?
I know it sounds overwhelming, but it's actually quite simple once you get into it. So if you think, somebody's listening to this right now and they feel like, you know what, I could see where working on my mindset would help me. I could see where making sure I refine my mechanics would help me.
Mm,
Get really dialing in on my movement, understanding what moves me would help me. Those are all probably signals as to why somebody probably should just reach out and go ahead and schedule a time to meet.
mm. So if people have been listening to this podcast episode and they've got some insights out of this and they want to connect with you and join your program, how can they do so?
The easiest thing to do is just go to spencercombs.com.
Mm-hmm.
There's a page there that says start here. Basically, it's an evaluation. It's a calendar. You can schedule time with me there. That'd probably be the easiest thing so that
Mm-hmm.
so we can get to know you a little bit and then we figure out where you want to go from here. Because I have everything from, group stuff to getting ready to roll out the Unshakable Secrets, which is going to be a 90-day program. Um, and then I've got, my all-inclusive 13-month kind of deal that's way more expensive and
Mm,
extremely powerful because we put you in the same room with other people like you.
mm, mm. Yeah. Wow, that's cool. So if what we'll do is we'll put the link to your website and all the other links into the podcast description so that people can connect and come and join your program. We're now going to kick into the 5 quick-fire questions. You can choose to answer these either in a one word or a short sentence. So the first question I have is, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
My the definition that I typically fall or has resonated the most with me actually comes from Earl Nightingale. It's the progressive realization of a worthy goal. And it just becomes more and more true the older
Mm,
I get.
mm, mm. Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
I appreciate, by the way, that you sent me these 5 questions in advance because I got a little moment to think about them. Because that one, I was thinking, man, there's a lot of people I've got inspiration from, but really, if you look at my logo, it's an elephant, and there's a reason why. One of those reasons, there's multiple reasons for the elephant. One of them is that I was raised by women and very matriarchal type environments, including my Italian grandmother, my nonna, okay, my mother's mother. Her father passed away, or not her, excuse me, her husband, my grandfather, was dead when my mother was 7, so
Mm,
long before I was ever around. But when he passed away, my grandmother opened up 7 salumerias, which are basically little stores, right? So little delis. After he passed away, so that she could give one to each of the children in a male-dominated society.
wow.
And we're talking, by the way, 50s, 60s, 70s, right?
Mm,
Well, technically 60s, 70s, and 80s in Italy. So not the easiest thing to do. And so very inspirational for me to see someone against the odds come out and really do something big
wow.
like that.
That is inspiring. Yeah. What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
I think you could probably say anything nowadays and somebody's going to disagree. I mean, I'm in America right now. We're in an election cycle, and we're having. I mean, it's just absolutely brutal. I mean, man, I'm looking forward to the election getting it over with. Of course, then everybody's going to complain about it here, but I think probably the most controversial posture I have on anything is a posture around the concept of therapy.
Mm,
Therapy, I think, too often is used as a crutch because a lot of people don't go with purpose about actually becoming healthy. I think a
mm,
lot of people are just going to get normal or feel better in the moment. Just like the American health system with the body, they go to the doctor not because they're going to go get healthy, but just so that they can be normal or average.
mm,
And so I think the and this is not true of every therapist, and I know this is going to cause some little bit of rift, but that's the point of the question. I think a lot of people go to therapy only to feel better, but not necessarily get better, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So, but I'm friends with quite a few therapists who are also NLP master practitioners and things of that nature that have used other modems, right, to move people forward beyond just the trauma situation or whatever it is that they're dealing with.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I was listening to Marissa Peer, and she was saying how the therapy that she learned, after a while, she didn't quite agree with it, and she then created her own, the RTT.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she coaches not only therapists but also coaches as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's not uncommon, by the way, for a coach to say something like that, because in my opinion, there's a difference between coaching, counseling, and consulting.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Coaching is a conversation about taking someone from average to above average,
Mm,
where therapy is usually taking someone who is below average to normal or
no.
to average position,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Consulting is just telling you what to do or how to do it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, right? I'm that physical trainer versus a therapist as a physical therapist, right? Getting
Yeah.
someone back to a position where they can operate and live day to day. But I think a
Mm,
lot of people are going and putting that label on of I'm going to my therapy session without
therapy.
the
Yeah.
outcome of becoming a better person. They just want to become a normal person, which
Normal person. Yeah.
is
Absolutely.
part of the process. But who wants to be normal?
No.
Just average.
Yeah. Exactly. And I won't ask you who you're going to vote for. Um,
Thank you.
okay. If you could go back to your younger self and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Most of my youth, I was exposed to some high level things. I had an uncle who was a Monsignor in the Catholic Church, and I've been in the Pope's house. I've seen some things in my life. But the funny thing is that for whatever reason, I always saw that for other people. Wealth was for other people, not me. That's like a whole nother dimension. Couldn't even wrap my brain around it, you know?
Mm,
Like that's just not me. From an identity perspective, it was a problem. So I think I would go back and say that's for you too. Like there's no reason why you couldn't do that. They're not any smarter than you. They're not any different than you. Right. That's probably what I would have gone back and said.
mm, awesome. What is one last message that you would like to share with the world?
I'm going to say three simple things. Get clear, get consistent, and get cultivated.
Mm, yeah, totally agree. Well, thank you, Spencer, for joining us on the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to get you back for some more episodes and dig a bit deeper into your framework and maybe go do a three-part pillar series or something. Uh, we might be giving away your secrets, but yeah, it'd be great to have you back and on some different topics. So thank you for joining us today. And if you
I am
can,
privileged to be here. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And if you've been listening to this podcast episode and you've got some insights or you've been inspired, please reach out to Spencer or myself, and we'd love to hear from you. Share this on your social media, tag us in so that we can see your comments. We'd love to interact with you guys. And make sure that you share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates, or anyone who would benefit from this episode. And then lastly, if you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes and we can get it out to the wider community. Lastly, I just want to say you are loved, you are worthy, champion your life and champion your greatness. Have an amazing day.